Now, quite apart from the sewerage, which we're going to get to later, I'm sure, there's a lot of it about, as Bernard Cribbins said. Quite apart from the sewerage, we've got to look at the issue with the schools and with Rishi Sunak. Because I think the three things that went together yesterday are catastrophic for the present government at the beginning of the autumn term, at the beginning of the new parliament, at the beginning of the new school term. It's a catastrophe. And we've got three things happening at the same time, all yesterday. We've got the 150-odd schools closed, or with bits of their buildings closed, roped off, with plenty of knowledge that this was a problem festering. Then we've got Jonathan Slater's bombshell interview yesterday morning on Radio 4 on the Today programme, pointing out that this was a lazy and indifferent ministry that was governing schools, as if we didn't already know that because of the background with people like Gavin Williamson bullying his way through the ministry and failing to achieve anything of substance except for frustration. And then finally, we ended all up with Gillian Keegan's hot mic stupidity, her foul-mouthed example, this is what you can aspire to be. People said I shouldn't use the term fishmonger. Well, fishmonger is the term that Shakespeare used in Hamlet, and I think that if it's good enough for Shakespeare, it's good enough for me. And I don't like the idea of fishwife. It seems fundamentally sexist. Fishmonger works perfectly well, but she's not even. I think that debases fishmongers. I've known some very good fishmongers. And in fact, there was a wonderful fishmonger who used to come round to a village where I used to live. And a fishmonger from Grimsby. I was terribly proud of my Lincolnshire background when he arrived. Anyway, it's all about the demands and the devastating revelations. The demands now on Rishi are for a reshuffle, especially if, as expected, Suella Braverman were to quit, maybe after the conference. But he should get rid of Gillian Keegan and Lee Anderson simply because their salty language does not appeal to Middle England. Their inclement language, I think, doesn't appeal to what Lee Anderson would call the Red Wall. It doesn't appeal to the gutter. It's from the gutter. People who are struggling to aspire out of the gutter do not want their noses rubbed in the sort of language which is appropriate to the gutter. They've got it back to front, utterly back to front. He's a foolish man, Lee Anderson, and Gillian Keegan is clearly. It's not so much the language which I object to with Gillian Keegan. It's the smug self-satisfaction, the idea of entitlement. In fact, if there's anything that we object to about Prince Harry, it's his sense of entitlement. And, I mean, how can anybody be more entitled? Aspiration is not about talking down, but about improving and about having a better standard of living. And that starts with a better quality of education, and it's signalled by a better language. Put bluntly, I mean, you can put it like this. If you cannot control yourself, and Gillian Keegan and Lee Anderson cannot control themselves, how can you possibly control anybody else? Both of these misfits need to go, and Rishi Sunak needs to have that in his to-do book with some urgency. And then he has to deal with the Slater allegations, which I think are probably much more difficult for him to deal with. Because the problem there is Rishi Sunak himself. Rishi Sunak was fingered by Jonathan Slater as the reason for the lack of investment and the lack of progress in rebuilding, renovating, repairing the schools that were identified as having a problem, going to rack and ruin. Even today, Rishi Sunak's boast of spending money on 50 schools a year for 10 years, a 10-year program of 50 schools a year, that's only 500 schools. That's well short of the 400 schools a year that Jonathan Slater proposed and that were in need in 2020 or whenever he flagged the problem up. 2018, I think. It's well short. It's well short of what Jonathan Slater proposed. And more than that, we now know there's 37 schools and endless schools in Wales, 37 schools in Scotland that have been infected by the rack problem. This will not go away. And Rishi Sunak would be as mad, as intemperate, as foolish as Lee Anderson and Gillian Keegan definitely appear at the moment, if he ignored this problem. It will not go away. It needs dealing with. You cannot just keep pushing problems into the long grass. It doesn't work. In the end, the long grass gets bogged down, as Therese Coffey knows, with her effluent problem.